Can you hear me? Does this work? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I think we start here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you about the future of mobility. I apologize that I will speak in English and the charts will be in English. If there are any questions, then hopefully I get a proper translation. But I apologize upfront for speaking English. So, future of mobility. The question is kind of, will the next 5 years be more disrupted than the last 50 years? And I can give you the answer right away. I do believe this is actually a case. I could easily say the next 5 years or 10 years will be more disruptive than the last 100 years. The main reason is actually, I don't think this works. Okay, now it works. So we do also believe that the change will primarily, that's why we are here, primarily obviously be in cities, in an urban environment. The reason is that more than 50% of the global population will live in cities, that 80% of the global GDP will be in cities, and to be quite honest, 70% of the global greenhouse gas emission. So regardless of what you think about kind of greenhouse gas and all those different things, cities don't necessarily have a choice because more and more people move into cities, more and more people will move around into cities. If you think about the congestion, if you think about the pollution in cities, and you keep the old system that you have so far right now, it's just not sustainable. So therefore, cities have to do something different. Now, on top of this, if you're not only thinking about people moving around, I think very important, you also have the commercial mobility. So goods are moving around with 40% more e-commerce expected by 2050. There is significantly, obviously, more delivery of parcels of goods. And you can imagine all those trucks, those delivery vans that are blocking the street and try to deliver something. So most important, the old system doesn't work. So I think that's one of the major reasons why we will not actually live in the same world going forward than we have been so far and that we actually used. I don't know how this works. Sometimes it works. Okay, so that's also still going back to the old system very quickly. Because we all used to the old system and we kind of grew up that we actually know that there are roads in cities, that we have a lot of cars, that there's smog, that actually pollute a lot and all those different things. But it's a really bad system. And it's a little bit surprising that this bad system was so successful over the last 100 years. If you think about 96% of the time, a car is parked. So which means you're really using your asset for 4% of the time, which is obviously a shocking number. There is no other asset than probably your own house that will be used actually so little. The second thing is, if you think about a combustion engine, you're losing about 2/3 in engine losses and idling, which is nothing else than you generate heat, which is obviously not a very smart thing to do. And then the next thing is obviously if you think about how many seats you have in a vehicle and how often do you use them and how many other things like transmissions and things like this, there's a little peak at the top there that is actually the energy that you really would use to move a person around. And I'm just showing you those charts just to demonstrate how inefficient the system is. The other things you probably have heard already, 95% of fatal accidents where somebody dies are driver errors. Machines don't make driver errors. Within those 95%, there's about 30% drunk driving. There's about 30% where people are distracted. So they drink something, they eat something, they take care of their kids, all those different things. That doesn't happen with a machine. Second thing is, if I make a driving error, I might or might not learn. In a machine, everybody actually who's in the system is going to learn. So you're going to do the same thing. So the learning process is significantly faster. This is also a main driver while insurance companies will pick it up. Like a seat belt, all those different things, like airbags, all those different things actually, if it makes sense, you will get a premium from your car company if you have ADAS systems, so if you have autonomous systems in there. And the last thing is, we all are used obviously to roads. Roads peak only about 5% of the time. The rest of the time, roads are empty. Think about nights. Roads are empty at night. Why we are not using roads at night? So the whole idea to building more roads to allow more traffic is exactly how the old system worked. And we're going to talk about this very quickly. Also, in a city, about 50% of the land area is used for roads, for parking, for service stations, driveways. Just think about 50% of the very expensive real estate in cities is actually used, everything around the car, and primarily, not necessarily driving, literally about parking the car. Now here's the good news. There's actually a lot of reasons why we should look into this very positively and very optimistically. So if you think about mobility and also sustainability in a city, obviously very important, the denser the city is, the closer people live together, the more people start working, the more actually things are very close for people so they don't have to travel very far. That's number one. So a little bit the opposite of American suburb life. The second thing is also it's healthier for people to walk. So that's one thing, density. The second thing is obviously the more you move, the more you walk, the more you use bicycles. That's a good idea. Yeah? I'm not going into those areas. I'm actually much more want to go into the vehicles, the personal transportation, the personal mobility, and also the commercial mobility. So here's the reason why this is also positive. So if you think about, there are 4 individual trends. Each of those trends are very, very powerful. Electrification of vehicles is very powerful. Shared mobility, I've talked about it. Connectivity, digitization, autonomy. All those terms that you actually have heard. Each of those trends is significant by itself and obviously has an unbelievable dynamic over the last 3 to 5 years. 5 years ago, the automotive industry pretty much declared the electrical vehicle as a dead kind of idea. Even if it's an old idea, they pretty much said it's not going to happen until Tesla brought a very attractive product. Now everybody has to build electrical vehicles. So you see about 40 of the models announced in 2021 will be in one way or the other electrified. If you look about connectivity, digitalization, all those services that people offer, we estimate that there will be globally a value of about $200 to $300 billion by 2030. If you look about shared mobility, just if you look kind of in North America, it's about a $30 billion investment. So it's everybody invests into this technology. And the last one is actually autonomy. I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but it's very important. People talk about very different levels of autonomy. Level 5 is very difficult. Level 4, and I explain this later a little bit, level 4 is actually, you can drive 70% of the miles driven in America and address them by level 4 by 2030. So therefore, I think it's very important, and we talk about this a little bit, what it means on the autonomy side. I'm sorry, I'm really challenged with this thing here. Okay, I can't move it. Doesn't work? Oh, there. Oops. Now it worked a lot. Okay, there we go. So I go very quickly through each of those areas. Electrical vehicle, very important. So far, you didn't have a lot of electrical vehicles. The electrical vehicles that were available are really boring machines. So it's a big compromise. You pay a lot of money, you have all the hazard actually with the charging, and the car is no fun to drive. Which has nothing to do with the technology, but it's exactly what Tesla did. Tesla allowed you with an electrical vehicle to accelerate like no other car before and actually have an instant acceleration. And all of a sudden people drove a Tesla and said, to drive electric is really fun. So in the future, this will be very different. So number one is people are used already to charging. So the whole idea about that you're running out of charge, a lot of people have figured this out. The second thing is there will be about 300 new battery electric vehicles globally launched, about 150 of them actually in China over the next 3 years. So the problem is actually not anymore that you're not finding attractive electrical vehicles and they're fun to drive. The problem very quickly will change into charging, because very quickly when all those people drive electrical, they're not having their own garage, which is still, I think, 80–90% of what people do at this point right now who drive an electrical vehicle. But anyway, very important, electrical vehicles will not be the shortage anymore. Yeah? Next thing is when we talk about connectivity. Why is the connectivity so important? 3 major points. We have unprecedented levels of data. Just to give you a few data points here. 90% of the data that is generated globally have been generated within the last 2 years. So you can actually go all the way back into mankind. 90% has been generated in the last 2 years. You can only imagine how much more data, and none of this data will ever be lost. So therefore, much more data in an enormous way that we ever had before. Extremely tumbling costs actually for a hard drive. In 2000, we have $15 per gigabyte. Right now, it's 3 cents in 2015. So it doesn't cost anything to store all those things. And then the other thing is powerful computers. If you think about, you have 40 times the increase in processing powers between 2010 and 2016. That's the reason why we can do all of this. It doesn't cost anything. So we have more electrical vehicles, we have all the connectivity that doesn't cost anything. The next thing is that people are using ride-sharing opportunities. So if you just look again, I think those are US data, because in the US there's obviously a lot of big ride-sharing market. The numbers of users are going up significantly between 13 to 15% per year. This number of rides people take is actually also going up for about 4% per year. And then the average price per ride goes up, not because it becomes more expensive. I think the main reason is because people drive longer distances, and it's the availability. But altogether, you literally have a market that grows 20 to 25% in North America, meaning in all other regions in the world, there's actually significantly more potential. Yeah? So that leaves also that you have a very different car data system, because the car manufacturers, they talk about their in-car technologies. Yeah? So this is everything that is in the car, literally your cockpit, your human-machine interface, everything that you do with your car. The second one is actually then the infrastructure around the car. We talked about this. That's a lot about the autonomous driving. Already in this area, it's very unclear how much this is a car manufacturer or not. And then the last one is obviously then you go to the urban environment. You have to interact with the urban environment. That's the back-end players and the processes. Very important. Before, there were different industries. They were working in parallel. So you had the car industry building a car. It was kind of the public institutions that built roads. It was gas stations that came from oil and gas companies. Obviously, they worked, all of them in parallel. If you want to do future of mobility with all the connectivity that you're talking about, they have to work with each other. And therefore, you have also the opportunity that not the old incumbents will succeed, but that a lot of the new companies are succeeding who bring all this information together. Now, why is autonomous driving also so attractive? Because to be quite honest, it's a little bit of a difficult graph. Bear with me. If you see kind of the go-to, I try to show it from here. Everybody can see it. If you see, I think, this wonderful pink line, this is actually what private car ownership is. You start, obviously, that you have to buy a car, therefore the depreciation of the car, and then you use your car. So that's this line. What you will see, actually, today is that the cost of an autonomous vehicle, the cost of a ride sharing is the blue line. The main cost in the ride sharing is actually 50% of it is the cost of the driver, which means if you drive today and you drive more than 6,000 kilometers, it's cheaper to own your own car. If you then take actually an autonomous vehicle, the driver out in a shared vehicle, your variable curve actually it becomes significantly flatter. Therefore, the point between owning your car and actually the shared autonomous vehicle is significantly further out. So which means you have to drive 20,000 kilometers to make an economic kind of equation that owning a car makes any sense. This is actually more than 89% of people that drive less than 20,000 kilometers. So I'm just saying, economically, very, very quickly, this becomes highly interesting. If you don't go to the autonomous, because people talk so much, it's always that people, everything that is new, they always very pessimistic. They compare the existing mature technology with everything that is new. So we had actually this phenomena, and McKinsey, to be quite honest, is actually part of this wonderful exercise. Every time there's something new, we go there, we look at all the drivers, we generate an optimistic scenario, an aggressive scenario where we say the technology is developing really, really fast, a more normal scenario, and then a pessimistic where everything goes really slowly. In reality, we are always too slow. So we were too slow on solar, we were too slow on wind, we actually were too pessimistic on battery costs, and I think we're also going to be much too pessimistic how long actually the autonomous driving will take. The most important thing on autonomous driving, the areas that you have is motion planning. I think it's object analysis, it's localization, where you are on your map. And if you look at level 5 means anywhere in the world a car can drive safely in an autonomous way. The technology is about 8 to 10 years out, yeah? Not in 2 or 3 years. So therefore, whoever actually says, can a car drive everywhere, and he says it's a long time out, he's right. But that's not the right way to look at this. If you look actually at what we call level 4, level 4 is that actually in specific areas you can drive autonomously, which means, for example, it doesn't make any sense on a country road to drive autonomous. You don't have the infrastructure. It actually economically doesn't make a lot of sense. If you leave all of this out, you can actually drive autonomous, and all the things that we had here, motion planning, objective analysis, localization, they're all in a time frame of 2 to 5 years. So all of a sudden, this becomes a significantly shorter time frame. 2018, so by 2020, 2022, we can drive from a technology standpoint, we can drive autonomous vehicles. And the most important thing is, again, this analysis for North America, this level 4 that I'm describing, you can cover about 70% of all miles driven in the United States. Yeah? So therefore, if you think about robotaxis and very autonomous level 4 robotaxis, that's what we have in the time frame of 2022, 27. So this is very much tomorrow. So those cars are developed as we speak, and I do believe that the technology will drive regulation, and technology will enable people to use this technology. And to be quite honest, we all sit in an airplane, and there's a pilot that we don't see. And we obviously sit there, and whatever we do in an airplane, we allow the pilot to fly, even if we're kind of afraid of flying. It's going to be exactly the same experience. It's just an experience that you actually realize the moment, if you have the opportunity to drive an autonomous vehicle, you feel very strange at the beginning, but very, very quickly you're going to get used to it. Yeah? So very important, autonomous, electrical vehicle, connectivity, ride-sharing, everything happens at the same moment in an urban environment. That's exactly where you get the acceleration from. Now, important, if you think about how to approach it, it's that you start segmenting. Because if you, again, as I said with my level 5 autonomous, that's an interesting question. It doesn't help you in a business environment. It doesn't help a city to blend like this. It doesn't help a private investor to think about it. So you have to think about, I'm talking about moving people around, am I moving goods around? You have to think about, am I talking about city, suburbs? Suburbs is relatively easy because the roads are just kind of one road. There's not too many crossings. There's traffic lights. Rural areas is obviously further out. Highways is very, very simple. Closed confined areas obviously are very, very simple. If you think about who owns the vehicle, you have to think about private ownership. I believe it's going to be kind of operated fleets, commercial fleets, where you're going to see the autonomous first. And then you're talking about obviously what level of autonomy are you talking about? We talked about level 4, level 5. Now, interesting enough, most of the time I talked about moving people around, which is also the case because people have picked up this topic much earlier. I think there's tremendous dynamic right now on the commercial vehicle side. The commercial vehicle and also the electrification of the commercial vehicle came after people talked about the passenger cars. But on the other side, while it started later, it has a significant acceleration. And the reason is relatively clear because there are less of them on the road. But in a city environment, and most of them are diesel engines, they obviously pollute much more. They have the particles in the air. So therefore, getting obviously diesels out of a city is very, very important. So therefore, the commercial vehicle side has generated a tremendous dynamic right now. And it's much easier to regulate than the person side. If you think about kind of voters for a politician, so every single private driver is a voter. If you do something he doesn't like, he's going to vote. If you think about kind of how many commercial vehicles have a significantly smaller number, and you can have significant impact. I give you just one or two kind of examples on the commercial side. Everybody thinks about cities and vans and delivery vans, and there's no doubt that they will happen and they are developed as we speak. It's also pretty much done globally in any city of the world that city planners think about electrical buses. So therefore, that's already done. The decision has more or less been made. It's only kind of a question of delivering electrical buses. Now the new area, and that's the interesting piece of it, it's heavy-duty trucks. Think about the really, really big trucks that drive on country roads, on highways, long distance. Everybody was saying that might be fuel cells, that might be for a long time diesel. Now what we have analyzed is actually there is a subgroup in all those miles driven on the long distance that always goes from point A to point B. And there might be on a daily basis 20, 30 buses. And they drive about 300 kilometers forwards and backwards, or they might actually drive 600 kilometers in one way. They're very predictable. They do it every single day. If you have this case, it's a perfect case for an electrified truck. And that you need some heavy batteries is not a big problem because the truck and the trailer is actually anyway heavy. So in percentage, it doesn't make a big difference. The second thing is also that the cost of the battery is not a big deal because you're driving so many miles. As I told you earlier, the moment you drive a lot of miles, the electrical vehicle will become significantly cheaper. So all of a sudden, we found about 50-60% of this segment is absolutely perfect for electrical vehicle trucks because you can either charge at a destination or you drive forwards and backwards and charge then overnight. So all of a sudden there is a big segment, and you see Tesla and you see other manufacturers making an announcement in this area as we speak. Actually, this has come out over the last 3 to 6 months. I give you two other examples. They are very simple. They are not new, but they're coming together right now. Think about urban consolidation centers. This is every truck today drives from highway, drives across the country, comes to a city, drives in the city, drops something. There is no rationale why this is actually should be a case. Much smarter would be if you stop this truck, if you reload, if you pretty much go by zip code or areas and have actually smaller vans just going to one specific area and have them as electrical driving. Other idea is night delivery. Think about you're walking around in the streets and you see all those trucks actually loading, unloading something. Think about you take them all off, you have them all driving at night. The main reason why they're not driving at night is maybe that people don't want to work at night. The second thing is also they make noise. Electrical vehicles make significantly less noise. Autonomous vehicles can drive backwards without this funny sound. Think about the funny sound a truck goes backwards. The logic is because the truck is dumb and expects you to run away if he goes backwards. That's the reason why it makes all this noise. So much smarter autonomous vehicle understands that you're behind him. So everything could be actually done at night. A very simple solution, doesn't cost a lot of money, frees up a lot of traffic. So I'm coming back to the whole idea. Building more roads is probably not exactly the right idea. I think using all this technology would be the right thing. And I want to conclude here just with a very simple message. The old system doesn't work. The old system we have for 100 years now. And we actually got to a point where we have pollution and congestion, and now more and more people and more traffic is going to happen in cities. So we need to go into the new system. The nice thing is that the new system will be significantly more convenient, will be less expensive, will be safer, will be greener. The issue is the transition into the new system. So that's what we're all discussing about. But I hope we're not actually discussing that the new system is actually a significantly better one. The one thing I would like you leave you, which worries me most, is cybersecurity, which nobody, to be quite honest, has solved. But to be quite honest, we all carrying our cell phone every single day. We're using it the whole time. We all know that we can be tracked, and we're still using it. So therefore, that doesn't seem to be something that stops us. And I think there is another solution that we need to find for this problem. Thank you very much. I was told that I can take some questions, so we can do some Q&A. I don't know if this works, if I actually get a translation, if I get a question in Russian. Otherwise, if somebody wants to ask me something in English, that's also perfectly fine.
Thank you so much. I'll speak in English if it's okay. My name is Maria, and I study urban transportation here in Moscow. And I have two small questions. The first one is, are you calculating the public opinion? So what people are thinking about all this stuff now, and maybe how their opinion can be changed in the future? And the second question is, if we change the traffic regime, if we start deliveries at night, won't it cause some traffic problems at night? Won't the traffic system overused at night?
So the first one, I think, on the public opinion. Our experience is actually that I think it's obviously true, and as I said, it's always dangerous when you do something new that people usually have a tendency, they like what they're used to, and everything that is new is difficult. When there is an accident with an autonomous system, obviously you can see it on video over and over again, and that's obviously influences public opinions on those things, and should be so, so rightly so. On the other side, what we realized is people need to have real-life experience with the technology. We looked actually and we analyzed electrical vehicle owners versus people who do not own an electrical vehicle. And it was very interesting because you can do this now because there's enough people who own an electrical vehicle, and what they're talking about and how they like and what they're worrying about is completely different than what people who have never actually owned an electrical vehicle own and how they worry about. So therefore, it is actually very important to have two things. Number one, you need to have a very clear strategy and explain people why you're doing it. So the moment you throw something at people which is new and which potentially feels to them also dangerous, like autonomous vehicle, without explaining why you're doing it and what the end state is, it's very, very difficult for people to accept it because they just see kind of one step that is actually negative. I'll give you an example. In New York City, we have a lot of ride sharing with Lyft and with Uber, more and more people using it. So the effect in the short term is that we have more traffic on the road. Exactly the opposite of what we should have. The second thing is education. There needs to be a lot of education. So I think in education is usually adults learn, not they read something and then they go back and actually forget about it again. So that's children actually read something and learn. Adults need to experience it. So adult learning is also that you need to find a way that people know how EVs work, how AVs work, all those different things. I think most people, to be quite honest, for me it works like my sons, they tell me how to use all those things. And then the next thing is that they use it first, then they tell me and help me to use it, and then in the third step, I finally feel comfortable. So you already see kind of the generation conflict in my own family.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much, and I would like to put a question about the idea. Your slides.
In your presentation, you said the themes that was discussed, I think, about last 10 years or more. But what's new ideas? What we don't think about now that you can imagine, that you can imagine in the future in 50 or in 20 years?
I'm trying to be careful to forecast what's going to happen in 50 years because I'm probably not going to be around and will be wrong anyway. So even 30 years is a very long time. So therefore, I do believe it's good to have a vision in 30 years, but then honestly, I'm trying to figure out what's the right step for this vision in a more like 5 to 10 year time frame. The second thing is, it's also interesting what is new. Just to give you an example, we talk about electrical vehicles being relatively new. The first electrical vehicle was invented in 1920. In 1963, I believe, General Motors even built an electrical vehicle that nobody wanted. Then we had the whole discussion came up on climate change. All the car OEMs actually had been measured on CO2. The main thing they told everybody was, if you ask us for stricter CO2 regulations, we will go bankrupt because it's going to cost us so much money. So to be quite honest, in the US, they first went bankrupt, then the CO2 regulations came, and now they're making record profits. So, because they actually, the CO2 regulations, and they were able to reduce the CO2 on their combustion engine by something like 30 to 50%. That's also why for some time they got away with kind of, we don't need EVs. So the question is therefore, is this an innovation or is it not? So I'm just trying to say electrical vehicles are literally now for the last 3 years that everybody has kind of is convinced that this is going to happen. There is also, usually when you look at this, there is always at least a 10-year difference between somebody has a great idea and puts a patent on it, and then actually until it's going to be commercialized. So therefore the question is always, what's kind of now the new idea when you commercialize it or when you have the first time you have the idea? And that's one thing. The other thing is, I think every single day you have startups coming up with new ideas. So therefore, I've never seen in my entire career, which is now 25 years in automotive and mobility, that you have seen a dynamic that I literally have seen over the last 2 years, 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
I have a microphone, so my turn. Thank you very much. My name is Samat. Thank you for your lecture. I have one question. I wonder, do you or someone else maybe have some forecast for electricity cost? Because you said we will use more and more electrical vehicles. So after 10 years, what happened with electricity cost? Because I worry about this. I use electricity for charging my phone and other things, and if cost will rise, it will affect on me.
So number one, I can give you 3 answers in this. The first one is forecasting. So I said this, I think, earlier, that forecasting is always difficult. Everybody asks McKinsey to forecast. So therefore, we forecast. And I think our forecasts are not very good. They're probably very logical and rational, and we look at the drivers, but they're always wrong. Yeah. And also, it doesn't help you, because we usually then forecast kind of how many EVs will the world gonna produce in 2030, which, to be quite honest, nobody cares. Because honestly, if you're a manufacturer, you would need to care about what you produce and what you do. So my point is first forecasting. There's 2 levels of forecasting, the one that everybody likes to see, and then the one that is actually helpful for a city and helpful for industries. The second thing, electricity cost, you're absolutely right. And by the way, there's another one which probably you also thought about, because there's enormous tax on gas everywhere in the world. So which means the moment you're not using gas, you use electricity, it's significantly less expensive. But on the other side, states, city, countries, they all actually lose tax money, significant tax money. Because they can't manage with their tax money today, they will find other ways and probably at one point increase electricity cost. Yeah? The third one is obviously there is a beautiful scenario at the end of the day, because if you can generate your own electricity, and if you think about kind of in an ideal world, you have solar panels on your roof, you have batteries obviously in your house, because during the day is exactly when the sun is shining, and in the evening is overnight, you probably when you're home, you're going to charge. So you're going to be independent of it, and you generate your own electricity. And therefore, I think it's important to look at this as mobility, urban mobility, as one part of the sustainable lifestyle in the city. There are other things that we work together with C40, and we looked at pretty much 90 plus global cities, and mobility is one of 4 main drivers, obviously, in an urban environment that you need to look at. But I agree with you, in the meantime, there might be a situation where it goes up, but I don't think it's a long-term vision.
First of all, Stefan, thank you very much for your beautiful presentation. But as far as I see, the insights are mainly based on developed markets, and we are here in Russia. So my question is, we probably have a bit different situation here. We have different consumption patterns. We have oil and gas country. We have different infrastructure, probably some issues with roads and so on. So my question would be, how would you adjust your insights based on applicability to Russia? So
yeah. So Yeah, the examples are because we have the data. That's exactly why we use Europe and North America. I do not believe that honestly this is actually a developed country kind of thing. I think it's a city issue. And to be quite honest, I talked to the city of Moscow. I actually talked to New York. I talked to European cities. I talked to Buenos Aires and Mexico City. I talked to some cities in the Middle East. They all have exactly the same issue. The main issue is the starting point. I think the outcome is exactly the same. The starting point is very different. So I give you an example. If you are in New York City, you have to do this because what other solution do you have? And if you have the money and the means and the technology, then you can do this. If you're in Nairobi, for example, you hopefully are not going to build, because the city is growing like crazy in Africa, I hope you're not going to build the same city like we have done before, which means we build a house, we build a road, and people buy cars, and then you have the same issue that we actually have. So therefore, they can forecast a lot. The second thing is, I think, this decentralized energy generation. If you're in remote areas today, you usually have a diesel engine. Yeah? If you have solar, all of a sudden, obviously, you have your own energy, and you can actually generate it in a sustainable way. If you have a sustainable car, it's actually, you can do a lot of things. So therefore, if you think also about India and the villages that are connected and actually have cell phone connection and all those different things, it all starts obviously with solar, that they can generate their own energy. So therefore, I think the starting point is different. The end point, I don't see any reason why the end point would not be very similar. Yeah. I think we have probably time for one more question.
Thank you for your presentation. Another forecast request. My name is Dina, and I want to know how do you see the future of, so to say, taxi global companies like Uber, Lyft? From one point, they very much looking for autonomous driving development, and from the other point, the integrated mobility is becoming a local issue of, I don't know, municipal authorities and so on. So what's the future of these global platforms, in your opinion?
So I'm not going to make a forecast now about Uber and Lyft, but maybe still trying to answer the question. So one reason, I look at them primarily that they actually provide a very convenient ride sharing, which is nothing else, to be quite honest, than a taxi would also be able to provide. The only thing, it's actually online, and it's usually relatively clean and organized and all those different things. So that's why people actually like it. They like kind of the black car, which is usually a little cleaner. It actually can see when it comes. The payment is very easy with the credit card, all those. So it's more convenient thing. So my first point is, there is no reason why not any local kind of organized commercial taxi company could do something very similar. An individual taxi driver probably doesn't have the opportunity. Number two is the current business model is clearly not sustainable, what they have, for two reasons. One is it's not economical, because they're not making money, and primarily they're trying to make money by taking the driver under 50% of the cost of the driver out. The second is that they're adding at this point more traffic. And the third one is obviously that they pollute. So therefore, in order not to pollute, they need to drive electrical vehicles. In order to actually get the cost down, they need autonomous vehicle. Honestly, only in a further dense distance, when you have a lot of autonomous vehicles, you also get the congestion down. Because at this point right now in the transition, you're adding to it. So I'm therefore saying the long-term strategy is still viable. They need to add a lot. That's exactly why they go in EVs, AVs, because otherwise it doesn't work. But I do believe the ride sharing as a mean is actually not a bad idea. And to be quite honest, if you think about, there is probably also a logic. There's a lot of cities don't have money. Now the question is, if it's affordable, if it doesn't add to your congestion, if it's sustainable, and it's actually more convenient for people to have individual way of driving around, you could actually forecast that the AV taxi is actually at the cost level of public transportation. So I'm not saying that public transportation, I think they need to intervene and actually work together. The only thing is I'm trying to say is it could be still actually going forward a very interesting alternative if you do not want to dig deep and take 10 years and spend billions for the next subway line like New York City. It took 10 years and several billions to build one subway station and one line. So, and therefore there is actually a much smaller, the next kind of AV that is actually so that's kind of the idea. Okay. I got the message that we're at the end. Thank you very much. I'm around if you have any other questions.
Большое спасибо.